Welcome to another episode of the Wandering Watercolor. Today we are painting the third page of the Ocean Life watercolor coloring book that I make. Let's get started. Okay, so this is the image that we're painting today. It's a Mandarin fish, and as you can tell, it's a very complicated image. We are just going to take our time, go slowly, and you always want to make sure you have a brush, a rag, or a paper towel, someplace to mix your colors. 2 jars of water on the side, and this is my palette. It's a custom palette with custom colors that I put in there myself. I'll have a description of everything, detailed description outlining all the tools, and you can kind of pick whatever you like. You don't have to use the same tools as me. Any watercolor paint works, and it'll also work with gouache, alcohol markers, pencils, watercolor pencils, a variety of things. But anyway, let's start here. So this is a Mandarin fish, and there's several color varieties of them, but usually they have kind of like a light orange undertone and then different layers of colored patterns on top of that. So here what we're mixing up is just the base, the undertone, or the base color of the fish, and we want to make sure that we have plenty of water because we're going to be using a lot of this and we don't want to run out. We do want it to be lighter, so we don't want it to be too concentrated, so having more water also helps with that. And I always usually have a piece of paper on the side just to kind of test colors, and this is about the tone that we want, which is perfect. If you're using a different palette, just mixing up some red and yellow will get you close to this color. But basically, the first thing that we'll do is, in here, we're just going to cover all of this in, and don't worry about going outside of the lines a little bit. These lines that are kind of throughout the image, or throughout the object, they'll be a different color. We don't want to layer it on because blue and orange are complementary colors, and if we put orange on the bottom and then blue on top, it'll actually turn to kind of like a brownish, grayish. So we do want to kind of avoid the marks that will be blue, just because it'll look much better when we go and we paint them in afterwards. So here what I'm doing is I'm just going in very slowly. I'm not worried about speed, I'm more worried about detail. And if you prefer to see where I make the marks first, feel free to either fast forward or just kind of watch how I lay down the marks and then do it yourself, or paint along with me. Either one works. The important thing to remember is you're not in a rush and you're just taking your time, getting in all those nice details. For a piece like this, you do want to make sure you're using a brush that comes to a really nice point like this one. And it doesn't always have to be the case. Especially with watercolor painting, you can get away with using a little more rounded, thicker brushes if you want to have more of a kind of like a loose effect. But in this case, we are wanting to get more of that detail in. And you'll notice I'm not pressing down on the brush, I'm just using the very tip of it to try to get those details in here. Like that. And if you go out of the line a little bit, or in the line, it'll still work just fine, since the majority of it is covered properly. So like that, avoiding all those little details that we want to leave white for now. That. And this eyeball is going to be black, so it's okay if we cover it in the meantime. Okay, we're going all this like that, all this here. We do want to cover the lips here, and then that and this down here. Okay, I'm gonna dry my brush. I'm gonna pick up some of that extra color, and the only place left is up here, and the fin on the back. And we almost forgot this place right here. Okay. So all of that is covered in now. And it looks pretty good. And then we're going to get some blue. And the blue that I'm using is, there's two common types of blue that usually come in watercolor palettes. One of them is more ultramarine, and the other one's more, or actually, phthalo blue and cobalt blue are the most common ones. This one is going to be the cobalt blue, but without getting too technical, just look for the one that has like a more muted blue as opposed to the one that's more vibrant, I guess. That's kind of like the way that I like to compare them. And what I'm doing is I'm just adding in more water so it comes out more transparent. So you know, actually I don't like that color very much, so I'm just gonna go ahead and mix in some of the phthalo blue. And I try to avoid using too much of this color just because of how strong it is. So I do like to dilute it down with more water. Let's see. A little more water. And we'll use a good amount of it too, so we want to mix up a good quantity. Make sure we have enough to cover all the different details. So it's a good amount of water, good amount of pigment. I have a good batch here. Okay, and that's perfectly fine. So what we'll do is, first thing is going in back here. And same thing, just go slowly. I may have put a little too much on the brush. And then the ones in the middle. Take your time. Use the very tip of the brush for those little detailed areas. And these lines here. And do that. That. And you can tell, like, there's some of the lines I do get outside of the line a little bit. Not a big deal. Cover that in. Just very slowly. You can be more abstract, more expressive with it if you prefer. It's just that whenever I'm working with such strong complementary colors, like blue and orange or yellow and purple, like things like that, I try to be more careful, just because if you go more abstract and they get a little out of control, where in the intersections where they mix, it'll just become kind of like a brownish gray blurriness, and then it's not as aesthetically appealing. Okay, just very slowly around the face here. very slowly. Do that. Okay. And then the edge here of that fin. Okay, so that looks great. Now, while that's drying, we'll go ahead and we'll get more of the blue. And a couple of the places we're going to touch them up and make them darker, a little stronger. Those places will be all the edges, basically, all the edges of the fins. So the first one being the one back here. We're just gonna go over it. And we may do another layer after this one, depending. You always have to remember watercolor always dries lighter. So sometimes adding 2 or 3 coats helps you achieve the look that you're going for much better. Okay. Back here. Okay. Down here. And same thing, just take your time. There's no need to rush. And you can see how we're building up those values because it's such a nice contrast. We may not need to repeat the fins a 3rd time. We'll see. Okay, I'm gonna rinse my brush. So now while that part is drying, what we're going to do is we're going to get back to our orange here. We're going to mix in, so we're going to get a little more orange and a little bit of brown. And this is to add in for some of the shading and grooves and outlines. Let's see. Gonna need more water. And more orange. This color is very similar, it's just slightly darker, slightly more opaque. So you can see this is the previous color, and then this will allow us to put in some nice shadows. Make sure that you don't have too much paint on your brush so that it doesn't accidentally overflow. First thing is, over here in the little grooves, the back of the fin, we're gonna go like this. And we're gonna do a little bit like this. And that's good there. We're gonna do a little bit at the bottom here, bottom of the top fin, like that. And also outlining some of those grooves. The bottom here, it's gonna be more like this in between. Okay. And then they have this weird gilt thing right here. We're just gonna outline that. And on both sides, like that. And a little bit on the bottom here. And a little bit on the fin. Definitely back here. And then here on the brow ridge, we're gonna go like that. And back here a little bit. And underneath the mouth, some of the ridges over here in the back of the fin. And so far so good. Rinse our brush. And while that is drying, we can actually go ahead and get some black or some dark gray, whatever you have. If you don't have any black in your palette, what you can do is just mixing some blue and brown, or blue and orange, and try to get like a dark gray color. What I'm doing here is I'm going to color in the pupil, or just the eye part, and I'm just also going to throw in a couple of outlines just for emphasis. I don't always do that, but whenever there's more detail, whenever the object is much more complex like this one, it's actually good to do that. It really helps define the shapes. Okay, so we're just gonna go ahead and color that in right there. And then that's perfect. We're just gonna leave that. And then the next thing, I'm gonna do an outline going on the underneath of the fish. It's not gonna be a continuous outline just because I'm going to leave out some of the bottom fins, but I'm just gonna go slowly around the edge. Very slowly. A little bit over here where the gill is, like that, and like that. Continue here, and a little bit right here where the mouth is. Maybe a little bit where the fin is. What that does is it creates a little bit of slight contrast, letting the viewer know that there's more really shade on the bottom and more light on the top. And now we're going to wait for all of this to dry, which it won't take long. But in the meantime, we're going to color in some of the environment. Now, if you want to, you can take your time and color in these corals here, but usually whenever there's such a large amount of detail in an object, the surrounding area, you want to leave it more vague, because otherwise it's kind of like you can create a clash. Like if there's too much detail in the corals and there's too much detail in the fish here, they'll be competing for the viewer's attention. So what we'll do here is I'll grab a little bit of orange, a little bit of red, kind of create like a nice pink, almost salmon-y coral color. You've probably seen add a little more red, make it a little more pink. And then definitely plenty of water, just because it'll help dilute it and not make it stand out too much. And honestly, I'm going to be very loose with it. I'm not really going to add any detail. It's kind of like a suggestion that's being thrown onto the canvas here, so, or paper I should say. So basically I'm just going to do this. And I'm pressing in to show some of the texture of the paper. So just like that, same here, same right here, a little bit right here, a little bit right here, like that, maybe a little bit here, and that's it. So you can see it's kind of like a suggestion. You know that there's something there. Your brain can kind of fill in what the object is. It also creates a better balance. It's a similar color to this one, but it's much lighter, so it just looks better overall. Okay. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to mix up the color that's going to be surrounding the fish, which is just like we'll go to turquoise because we don't want it to be the exact same blue. And the way that you really want to mix that, or more of a kind of like a teal turquoise, just blue and green works just fine if you mix those two together. And you don't want it to be overpowering. Again, you want it to be more water, less pigment, just because it's it'll be much more subtle, just like you want this to be subtle. So I'm making sure that I have plenty mixed up, since there's a lot of ground to cover, so to speak. Let's see, maybe a little more water because this looks a little strong. Okay, that'll be good. And remember, whenever you can kind of lay down the wash however you want, but always remember, if you press down and kind of drag the brush, you have those nice texture in the paper that give it more character. It's more interesting to look at. So we're just going to go ahead and go all the way around carefully. And then as you get further away from the fish, we're just going to drag that brush in like that. And just like that. Same here. We'll go slowly. I always like to remind myself that usually if I go slow, it ends up turning out much better. And often I just end up completing the image faster because I'm avoiding mistakes. Okay. That. That. And I rinse my brush. That's looking pretty good. I am going to dab my my rag here. I'm going to dab just a little bit right where I see that there's a spot of black paint that's not dry. And actually, I'm going to do the same here for where the eye is. The reason I did that is the last thing that I want to do is kind of put one layer here of kind of like a shadow to show a little more dimension. And if these black lines are still wet, then you're running a risk of just ruining the whole image, which looks great so far. This is a really, everything's rendered really good so far. So I'm going to grab a little bit of brown, a little bit of brown, I'm going to throw in some of that blue over here. Mixing those two together usually gives you kind of a gray, but I don't want it to be too gray. I want it to be kind of like almost like a desaturated, darker orange. And what I'm mixing up here seems pretty close to what I'm going for. Maybe a little more blue. Let's see, I'm going to test it out. That's too dark though, so we want it to be lighter. So I'm going to mix in a lot more water, just kind of dilute it. Okay, let's try that now. Perfect, because you can still see it, but it's subtle, it's not overpowering. And so this part, you want to kind of do it in one go. You're just gonna go around the lower part and then just kind of curve around it. If you want, feel free to watch me do it first and then do it yourself, because if you do too many passes over the colors that are underneath, you're running the risk of smudging them. If the paint is sufficiently dried, then it shouldn't do that. But because I don't want to wait too long, because otherwise the video is going to get really long, I just want to do it all now. And it's also a good thing to practice, like if you're sketching or painting on site, like if you're looking at somebody or something, if you're doing plein air, it's better to be comfortable with doing it all in one go. Otherwise, there's nothing wrong with going back to it. So it's going to look like this. I'm going to go like this. And you can see it's subtle. It's not very strong. But you can see that there's a little bit of a dimension to it. And I might actually just drop a little bit. Maybe not drag the brush across, but maybe just drop a little bit of paint in. Because I've already outlined the path, and now I'm not dragging it, which kind of helps amp it up. Definitely add more down here. And I'm dabbing it as opposed to dragging the brush, I'm kind of dabbing it, which helps create the shadow effect without smearing the underneath, the undercolors. Do this here, same thing here, like that, maybe a little bit up here, a little bit right there. And you know, I might even do a little bit up here where the eye is, kind of like that. And then rinse my brush. And I would say that that's pretty much done. Yeah, if you wanted to, you could add another layer of, if you wanted to, like black, to make the eye pop out a little more, maybe more outline if you wanted to. But this looks pretty good. If you have questions, just leave them in the comment or send me a message, whatever works. And again, I'll leave all of the tools and everything in the description. That way you can get a better idea of what kind of paint you want to use. I'll leave different types of paint for different price points, so you can kind of pick whatever is best for you. But the cool thing about this paper is that it's nice quality paper, so it works with almost anything. Actually, there's nothing that I've used so far that didn't work. But if you find something, let me know. And with that, I'll see you on the next one.